He had been there for 20 years on Skid Row and he was heavily addicted. He said, you know, Jason, I gotta let you know, I checked myself into a rehab center for the first time, and it was because of your portrait. I truly saw myself for the first time.
We notice people around us all the time, but how often do we really see them? Artist Jason Leith challenges us with this question through his thoughtful, intimate portraits of those shrouded in poverty, proclaiming an essential truth that may have been forgotten.
We either rise or fall to the environment that's around us. And if you're surrounded by ugliness and anything that's opposite of beauty, you might start to say like, you know, this is who I am and I deserve this. And so that's what I felt like, I'm gonna bring a gift of beauty and see what that does in that space.
You call them relational portraits, right? That's your style. Can you explain a little bit of what that means?
A relational portrait is something where, you know, you're making a portrait, but you're really embracing that process that takes, I think, at least an hour to make like a portrait that's accurate to that person's likeness. It's a time that we take intentionally to ask questions about that person's life, to really look them in the eye, to call out the good in them. When I was younger, I felt like I needed to be kind of like quiet, not really share about myself or my feelings or my needs or anything. I think because of that, I can see when other people feel like that. And I love to see that person and try to draw them out. And all of a sudden there's this kind of like revelation, this like rush of imagery through my head of making portraits of people as a way to live out God's mission for my life, as a way to love people. And I have not been able to get rid of that idea since then.
I'm very thankful for people like you because I was that kid, you know, that quiet kid that nobody really, you know, would talk to or notice, like just like you, like try to point them out and try to make them feel seen. So that leads me to Sacred Streets. How did it start? When did everything intertwine?
I think it was Mother Teresa who said, love the person who's closest to you. And this ended up being a person who was living in a vacant lot near my university. I knew this was the moment where I was supposed to go and try this idea for the first time. And it actually went really, really well, even though I was so scared to try it for the first time. He said, I feel human again when I'm with you, just from this drawing. And so that's when I decided I need to make a lot of these and I need to just keep on doing this because it's helping people. Well, I started going to Skid Row after that portrait. And I made 12 portraits on Skid Row in Los Angeles. We made this sacred space out of reclaimed materials to house these 12 portraits and show them to people who were on the streets on Skid Row. And like when people looked at these portraits, they're like, this person's important. I need to pay attention to this person's life.
Do you straight up just go up to them and ask them if you can draw a portrait, or is there a different way that you approach it?
If it's like on the sidewalk level where people are just wandering, I will walk the block there and wait for a connection to happen. And sometimes the person will say like, hey, what are you doing here? Because I'll look out of place, right? Like I'll be carrying like my art stuff. And so people will ask me what I'm up to, and that's a great kind of like segue into like, I'm making portraits, like, can I make yours today? And there's these two guys that were together on Skid Row, Robert and John. They seemed like unlikely friends, but I made both of their portrait. Robert, he had been there for 20 years on Skid Row and he was heavily addicted. He wanted to warn people against kind of living the way that he did. And I made his portrait on this piece of paper that had these holes already pre-punctured in it. But he lifted up his shirt and he said, can you draw these kind of like lesions on my skin? And it was from his addiction that those were there. And I told him, I can do that in a way that shows them almost like Christ's wounds, where like when Christ was resurrected, he still had holes in his hands. So I positioned his body over those holes so that it was depicted, but it was in a way that was like, God has delivered him from this. So we were kind of like making that portrait in faith. And I went back the next week after the Relational portrait session to try to find him. And he wasn't there, but I got a phone call as I was walking Skid Row and it was his voice on the other end of the phone. And he said, you know, Jason, I gotta let you know, I checked myself into a rehab center for the first time. And it was because of your portrait. I truly saw myself for the first time.
Wow.
And I almost wanted to drop to the floor because I had never imagined that God could use me in that way, to use drawing to help people to recover from a 20-year addiction. How is that possible? But the same exact thing happened with his friend John. After I made his portrait, I came back again for another session with him, and he was gone. His friends had told me, yeah, he went back home to Arizona. We had been trying to get him to go back for a long time because we knew that he didn't belong here. And so I started to realize that this was not coincidence, that people were deciding to shift their life in a kind of a dramatic way after the portrait.
How does that feel? I mean, do you ever just, stop and try to process everything that is happening?
It does feel unreal. I know it's God because, that idea dropped into my head from nowhere to make these portraits as a way to connect with people. And my slow and steady yes has done things that I never thought could possibly happen. It's so cool. I love thinking through the filter of like your greatest impact to the world is your passion plus like where your heart breaks for the world and what the world needs. And I don't know if I would have that lens of like, what does the world need, or where does like your heart break for the world if it wasn't for kind of like trying to model my life after Christ. I feel like I'd be living a completely different career path if it wasn't for my faith, and they're almost inseparable.
Can you tell us about this one, this art right here?
I really wanted to talk about this one today because Sid is someone that's inspired me. I met him at the Hub, which is a resource center in Orange, and I drew him with this styrofoam container, which kind of like represents almost like the sacred burning heart, but it's a styrofoam container because this box was actually a box of styrofoam containers. I would always find him with one of these containers because that's what he would be receiving at the resource center that he would go to. And not only would he be receiving them, but he'd be giving the food away. So he'd always be finding somebody that didn't have something that day. He said, hey, here, take some extra food, or hey man, he was always making sure that I had food when I came to visit. And so I just saw this as Sid's kindness and his heart for others. And I wanted to just represent him compassionately. And that's why it says down here, we all bleed red. That's something that Sid would always say, but it says it in 3 different languages because he has, the roots, like his parents were born in Bethlehem, but he is also Palestinian. And he's someone who wants to see peace in that situation.
What can you tell us about this piece right here?
This piece still very much is in progress. I just met Stephanie a few weeks ago. I made this sketch of her. I drew her with a crown, and I did that because her name, Stephanie, it comes from the root Stephanus, and that means like crowned one or victorious one. I asked her, what she wants to be victorious over in her life, and she said that she wants to be able to reconnect with her family, and she really feels like there's a distance that doesn't need to be right now, and she feels like she can be victorious over that, and so I'm believing that with her. This was actually drawn on a cardboard box as well, but I loved this one because it says Nest right here. It's like a home products box that had some sort of furniture in it, but I loved that word for her, just how she can find home and nest and find safety.
Wow, I'm very impressed by these connections that you're able to make from, things that you find and, related to their story. Jason, thank you so much for having us here today and reminding us that human dignity is really important and can change the world.
I do hope that this encourages other artists to be able to see that their gift, their simple yes, can bless people maybe more than they thought before.